Some handwriting doesn't belong on paper. It belongs in the parts of your life you never truly escaped. The rain fell softly against the tall windows of Bellamy's Steakhouse, turning the Manhattan skyline into blurred silver lights beyond the glass. Inside, everything moved with quiet precision. Crystal glasses clinked softly. Piano music drifted through the candlelit room. Expensive watches caught flashes of amber light whenever wealthy men raised their hands to speak. Ethan Whitmore barely noticed any of it. At 41, the billionaire founder of Whitmore Capital had perfected the art of not looking up. Not at waiters. Not at strangers. Not at anything that didn't directly matter to the billion-dollar acquisition currently glowing on the screen of his phone. His dark charcoal suit looked untouched by the weather outside. His silver watch rested against the edge of the table beside an untouched glass of bourbon. Across from him sat two executives nervously waiting for his approval on a merger worth nearly $400 million. Ethan said nothing for a long moment. His cold gray eyes remained fixed on the documents on his screen, while the piano continued somewhere in the background like distant memory. Then a soft voice interrupted the silence. "Your check whenever you're ready, sir." Ethan reached automatically for the black leather folder without looking at the woman standing beside him. Another waitress. Another voice. Another invisible person moving through the machinery of Manhattan luxury. "Leave it there," he muttered. The woman nodded once. Of course. She stepped away quietly. Ethan finally looked down at the receipt and froze. The room did not change. The music continued. Rain slid slowly across the windows. But something inside him stopped moving. His fingers tightened against the edge of the paper as his eyes locked onto the handwriting at the bottom of the check. "Thank you for your patience tonight." Claire, the penmanship was elegant without trying to be. Smooth loops. Long, careful lines. The letter Y curved gently beneath the signature. The T leaned slightly left. Ethan's breathing slowed. His thumb moved against the ink like he no longer trusted what he was seeing. Because he had seen it before. Years ago. In another life. The silver Patek Philippe slipped from his fingers and hit the table with a sharp metallic crack. One of the executives jumped. "Mr. Whitmore?" Ethan didn't answer. His eyes remained fixed on the receipt. On the handwriting. On the impossible familiarity crawling slowly up his spine. 12 years. 12 years since he had last seen those letters written exactly that way. 12 years since the night he sat alone in a dark apartment after losing nearly everything he owned during the collapse of his first company. 12 years since a single envelope appeared beneath his office door with no name attached. No address. No explanation. Just a handwritten message folded carefully inside. He still remembered every word. Some people survive quietly. Ethan swallowed hard. The executives exchanged uncomfortable glances. "Sir, are you all right?" one finally asked. Ethan ignored him. Instead, he looked up slowly toward the far side of the restaurant where the waitress moved calmly between tables carrying two plates balanced carefully against one arm. Blonde hair tied back neatly. Black uniform. Quiet posture. Nothing dramatic about her. Nothing demanding attention. But for the first time that evening, Ethan Whitmore actually saw her. Claire Bennett moved with the kind of calm that couldn't be trained. She never rushed. Never smiled too hard. Never hovered around wealthy customers hoping for larger tips, like some of the younger staff often did. She simply worked. Quietly. Efficiently. Almost invisibly. Yet Ethan found himself watching her instead of the merger on his phone. The receipt remained in his hand. His pulse felt strange now. Uneven. Familiar. Claire stopped beside another table to refill a water glass. A customer thanked her. She nodded politely and wrote something down in a small order book using a dark fountain pen. Ethan's chest tightened again. Fountain pen. Nobody used fountain pens anymore. Not unless handwriting mattered to them. His eyes narrowed slightly as he watched the movement of her hand. Smooth. Controlled. Elegant. Exactly like the letter. One of the executives cleared his throat nervously. "Should we continue tomorrow?" Ethan stood abruptly. The chair scraped softly against the floor. "Meeting's over." "Sir." "Tomorrow," Ethan repeated coldly. The men immediately gathered their papers. Within seconds they were gone, leaving the table silent except for the rain and piano music drifting through the restaurant. Ethan remained standing. The receipt still rested between his fingers like something alive. Across the room, Claire tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear while carrying another tray toward the kitchen doors. She looked tired. Not dramatic tired. Real tired. The kind hidden behind practiced grace. Ethan stared at her for several long seconds before finally walking across the restaurant. The closer he got, the more impossible the feeling became. Claire turned just as he approached. Her blue eyes lifted calmly toward his face. No nervousness. No recognition. Just professionalism. "Did you need something else, Mr. Whitmore?" Even her voice felt quiet. Ethan held up the receipt carefully. "Where did you learn to write like this?" For the first time that evening, Claire hesitated. Only for a second. But Ethan noticed. Her eyes dropped briefly toward the paper in his hand before returning to his face. "From my mother," she said softly. Then the kitchen doors swung open behind her, warm light spilling briefly across the dark restaurant as the smell of fresh coffee drifted into the air. And Ethan Whitmore felt something he had not felt in years. Fear. Quiet. Unshakable fear. Because deep inside his coat pocket, folded carefully beside his wallet like a secret he never stopped carrying, was the old letter that had saved his life. Claire Bennett did not look like someone carrying pieces of another person's past. That was the first thought Ethan Whitmore could not escape as he stepped out into the rain-soaked Manhattan night 20 minutes later. Black umbrellas moved along the sidewalks like shadows beneath the streetlights. Taxi tires hissed against wet pavement. Somewhere down the block, a saxophone player performed beneath a subway entrance while steam curled slowly into the cold November air. Ethan barely noticed any of it. The folded receipt remained inside his coat pocket beside the old letter. Side by side now, present and past pressed together like something inevitable. His driver opened the rear door of the black Mercedes, but Ethan did not move immediately. He looked back through the rain-covered windows of Bellamy's Steakhouse. Claire was still inside, clearing glasses quietly, writing another order into that same small notebook with the dark fountain pen. Calm, unaware. "Sir?" the driver asked carefully. Ethan finally slid into the car without answering. The interior smelled faintly of leather and cedar. Warm light glowed softly against polished surfaces while the city moved outside the tinted windows in streaks of silver and gold. Usually, Ethan used the drive home to finish contracts or answer emails. Tonight his phone remained dark in his hand. His thoughts stayed fixed on the waitress with familiar handwriting and tired blue eyes. "Home, sir," the driver repeated. Ethan looked out at the rain for several long seconds. No, his voice sounded quieter than usual. "Take me to the office." The Whitmore Capitol Tower stood above Midtown like a wall of black glass disappearing into the clouds. At nearly 11 o'clock, most floors were dark except for scattered islands of light where overworked analysts still chased deadlines beneath fluorescent ceilings. Ethan rode the private elevator alone to the top floor. The doors opened into silence. His office overlooked the entire city. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed Manhattan beneath sheets of rain, while distant sirens echoed softly somewhere below. Ethan loosened his tie slowly as he crossed the room. Then he walked directly toward the old walnut cabinet near the fireplace. The combination lock clicked softly beneath his fingers. Inside the safe rested only 3 things. A silver watch that no longer worked. A faded photograph of a smiling brunette woman standing beside a younger version of Ethan on a beach in Cape Cod. And the letter, folded carefully despite its age. Ethan picked it up with unusual caution. Even after 12 years, the paper still carried faint creases from how many times he had unfolded it in the middle of sleepless nights. He sat down slowly beside the dark windows and opened it again beneath the soft amber light of the desk lamp. Some people survive quietly. The handwriting was identical. Not similar. Not close. Identical. Ethan stared at the loops and curves until his vision blurred slightly. He remembered that winter better than he wanted to. 30 years old. Broke. Humiliated. 3 lawsuits crushing the company he had built from a rented apartment in Queens. Investors disappearing overnight. Newspapers calling him another arrogant young entrepreneur who flew too close to success and burned on the way down. Back then, he had spent entire nights alone in his office staring at spreadsheets that no longer mattered. Then one morning, the letter appeared beneath his door. No signature. No explanation. Just a few handwritten lines that somehow reached him when nothing else could. Ethan had never discovered who wrote it. Until tonight. Or at least he thought he had. A quiet knock interrupted the silence. His assistant Daniel stepped carefully into the office carrying a tablet. You wanted tomorrow's meeting summaries before midnight. Ethan folded the letter immediately. Leave them. Daniel paused, noticing the unusual tension in Ethan's face. Everything all right? Find someone for me. Daniel blinked slightly. Tonight. Tonight. Ethan reached into his coat pocket and handed him the restaurant receipt. Claire Bennett. Works at Bellamy's Steakhouse. Daniel glanced down at the elegant handwriting. What am I looking for exactly? Ethan looked back toward the rain-covered skyline. Everything. Daniel hesitated. He had worked for Ethan nearly 8 years. He understood the billionaire's moods better than most people. Tonight felt different. Not angry. Not cold. Something else. Something unsettled. I will have a report by morning, Daniel said carefully. Ethan nodded once. After the door closed, silence returned. Heavy. Quiet. Familiar. Ethan walked slowly toward the windows overlooking the city. Thousands of lights stretched endlessly into the distance. Millions of strangers moving through lives he would never know. For years, he convinced himself that success erased loneliness, that enough money could fill any silence. But tonight, standing alone 48 floors above Manhattan, all he could think about was a waitress writing orders with a fountain pen. Claire Bennett. He whispered the name once beneath his breath, like testing whether it belonged inside his life. Then his eyes drifted back toward the folded letter resting on the desk. The paper looked smaller now than he remembered. Fragile. Human. Ethan loosened a slow breath against the glass. Somewhere in the city below, Claire was probably finishing her shift. Maybe taking the subway downtown. Maybe walking home through the rain with sore feet and cold hands like thousands of other exhausted New Yorkers. Completely unaware that a billionaire had just reopened the oldest wound of his life because of the way she wrote the letter Y. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. But another thought kept returning now. Quiet. Persistent. Dangerous. If Claire inherited the handwriting from her mother, then who exactly had her mother been to him 12 years ago? Claire Bennett lived in the kind of apartment most wealthy people would never notice even while walking directly past it. A narrow fourth-floor unit above an old laundromat in the Lower East Side. The hallway smelled faintly of detergent and radiator heat. The paint near the stairwell peeled quietly with age. But inside apartment 4B, everything was clean, warm, carefully arranged like someone trying to protect peace from the noise of the outside world. Claire unlocked the door just after midnight and stepped inside with tired shoulders and rain still clinging to the hem of her dark coat. The apartment greeted her with silence except for the low hum of the refrigerator and distant traffic drifting through old windows. She kicked off her shoes slowly beside the door and rubbed her aching feet against the hardwood floor. Another double shift finished. Another night carrying plates beneath expensive chandeliers for people who rarely looked directly at her. Usually, she forgot customers the moment they walked out the door. But tonight lingered strangely in her chest. Ethan Whitmore's face had changed when he saw her handwriting. Not curiosity, not attraction, something deeper, almost fear. Claire crossed toward the small kitchen and filled a kettle with water. Her movements remained slow and practiced, calm the way some people become after years of carrying responsibilities quietly. She tied her blonde hair into a loose knot and leaned briefly against the counter while the kettle warmed. Then her eyes drifted toward the old wooden box sitting near the bookshelf beside the window. Her expression softened instantly. The box was faded at the corners now, walnut wood scratched from years of moving apartments. Claire walked toward it carefully and sat cross-legged on the floor beneath the dim lamp nearby. Outside, rain tapped softly against the glass while the city continued moving somewhere below. She lifted the lid gently. Inside rested dozens of folded papers tied neatly with pale blue ribbon. Letters, handwritten notes, old photographs, a silver fountain pen wrapped carefully in cloth. Claire picked up the pen slowly between her fingers. The metal felt cool against her skin. Her mother used to say handwriting mattered because it carried pieces of the soul no computer ever could. People reveal themselves in the way they write. She would whisper during quiet evenings at their kitchen table years ago. Especially the lonely ones. Claire smiled faintly at the memory. Eleanor Bennett had possessed the kind of kindness that exhausted itself on other people. She wrote letters constantly. Encouragement cards. Notes for struggling neighbors. Messages left anonymously for strangers going through difficult times. Sometimes Claire would wake up in the middle of the night and find her mother sitting beside the window writing beneath a small lamp while soft jazz played from an old radio. Eleanor believed words could keep people alive longer than medicine sometimes could. Claire never forgot that. Her fingers moved slowly through the stack until she found a faded photograph tucked near the bottom. She and her mother stood together outside a small bookstore in Brooklyn nearly 10 years earlier. Claire looked younger, happier somehow. Eleanor's arm rested around her shoulders while the wind lifted strands of blonde hair across both their faces. Claire traced the photo gently with her thumb. "You would have liked him," she whispered softly toward the empty room before immediately shaking her head at herself. Ridiculous. Ethan Whitmore was just another wealthy man carrying too much silence behind expensive suits. Still, the way he looked at the receipt unsettled her. The kettle whistled softly from the kitchen. Claire returned the photograph carefully to the box and stood up. But before closing the lid, something caught her eye near the bottom corner beneath the stack of letters. A folded newspaper clipping yellowed with age. Claire frowned slightly and pulled it free. The headline read, "Young Entrepreneur Faces Public Collapse After Investor Withdrawals." Beneath the title stood a photograph of a much younger Ethan Whitmore exiting an office building surrounded by cameras 12 years earlier. Claire stared at the article in confusion. Why had her mother kept this? She unfolded the clipping carefully. Several handwritten notes appeared in the margins written in Eleanor's familiar cursive. "He looks tired. People become cruel when someone starts failing publicly. I hope someone is being kind to him." Claire's chest tightened slightly. Slowly, her eyes drifted back toward the wooden box filled with letters, then toward the silver fountain pen still resting beside it. A strange feeling moved quietly through her stomach now. Uneasy, familiar, as if pieces of a puzzle had shifted slightly out of place. Across Manhattan, Ethan Whitmore remained awake in his office. The city glowed cold beneath the storm while untouched coffee sat cooling beside his desk. Daniel finally returned just after 1:30 in the morning carrying a slim black folder. "Claire Bennett," he said carefully while placing it down. 26 years old. Born in Brooklyn. Mother passed away 5 years ago from heart complications. No criminal record. No social media presence beyond a private account with barely any activity. Ethan listened silently while staring at the folder without opening it. "Father," he asked quietly. Daniel hesitated. No listing on the birth certificate. Ethan finally looked up. "What about the mother?" Daniel opened the folder slowly. "Eleanor Bennett. Worked several maintenance and cleaning jobs across Midtown during the early 2000s. Ethan's expression remained unreadable. "Anything connected to my old company?" Daniel nodded once. "Actually, yes." Silence filled the office. Even the rain outside seemed quieter now. Daniel glanced carefully toward Ethan before continuing. "According to employment records, Eleanor Bennett worked nights as a janitor in your old office building during the year your first company collapsed." Ethan stopped breathing for one long, terrible second. Somewhere deep inside the office, the grandfather clock near the fireplace ticked softly into the silence. One sound, then another. Quiet, heavy, unavoidable. The next morning arrived gray and cold over Manhattan. Rain still clung to the streets in thin silver reflections, while commuters hurried beneath umbrellas carrying coffee cups and unfinished conversations into another busy Thursday. Claire Bennett stood behind the counter at Bellamy's Steakhouse, tying the strings of her black apron carefully behind her back. The lunch crowd had not arrived yet. Soft jazz drifted quietly through the nearly empty dining room, while sunlight struggled weakly through heavy clouds outside. "You look exhausted," said Nina, another waitress, while stacking polished glasses beside her. Claire smiled faintly. "Late night. Rich people problems again." Nina laughed softly. "One guy asked me yesterday if asparagus was gluten-free." Claire gave a quiet laugh despite herself. But her mind remained elsewhere. On the newspaper clipping. On Ethan Whitmore's face after seeing her handwriting. On the strange invisible thread connecting her mother to a billionaire she had never spoken about before. Claire reached for her order book and paused. The silver fountain pen rested against the paper exactly where she left it last night. For years, she never questioned why her mother insisted she learn cursive so carefully. Eleanor used to sit beside her after dinner correcting every stroke patiently. "Slow down," she would whisper whenever Claire rushed through a sentence. "People can hear your emotions in your handwriting." Back then, Claire thought it sounded poetic. Now it felt unsettling. The front doors opened quietly. Cold air slipped briefly into the restaurant. Claire looked up automatically toward the entrance and froze slightly. Ethan Whitmore stood there alone. No assistants. No bodyguards. No expensive entourage trailing behind him like usual. Just a dark wool coat damp from the weather and tired gray eyes that looked older this morning somehow. The hostess immediately straightened. "Mr. Whitmore, welcome back." Ethan barely acknowledged her. His eyes had already found Claire across the room. Claire felt something tighten quietly in her chest as he walked toward her section. Every movement about him remained controlled, polished, disciplined. But beneath it she sensed exhaustion now, like someone who had not slept. Ethan stopped beside her table near the windows. "Good morning," Claire said carefully. "Coffee, please." His voice sounded rougher today. Claire nodded and moved toward the counter. Ethan watched her while removing his gloves slowly. She noticed everything without seeming to. The expensive watch. The faint shadow beneath his eyes. The way his fingers lingered briefly against the edge of the table as though grounding himself. Claire returned moments later with black coffee in a white porcelain cup. Ethan looked at the steam rising between them before finally speaking. "You inherited more than your mother's handwriting." Claire remained still. "I am sorry." Ethan reached slowly into his coat pocket, then placed the folded letter carefully onto the table between them. Time seemed to quiet itself around that single piece of paper. Claire stared at the worn folds, the faded edges. Her heartbeat slowed strangely. "What is this?" she asked softly. Ethan's thumb rested lightly against the paper before he answered. "A letter someone wrote me 12 years ago." Claire looked down again. Something about the handwriting visible through the fold made her stomach tighten instantly. Familiar. Too familiar. Ethan watched her expression carefully. "Your mother worked in my old office building." Claire looked up sharply. "How do you know that?" "I had someone look into it." The honesty surprised even him. Claire lowered her eyes again. Not angry, just cautious now. Ethan continued quietly. "At the time, my company was collapsing. I thought my life was over." His gaze drifted briefly toward the rain outside the windows. "Then one morning I found this beneath my office door." Claire unfolded the letter carefully. Her breath caught immediately. It was her mother's handwriting. Without question. Elegant. Warm. Steady. Claire read the first lines silently while the sounds of the restaurant faded around her. "Some people survive quietly." Her fingers trembled slightly against the paper. Ethan noticed. "You recognize it?" Claire nodded slowly. "She wrote like this all the time." Silence settled gently between them. Not uncomfortable, just heavy with things neither fully understood yet. Claire continued reading the short letter while memories returned quietly. Her mother writing at the kitchen table after midnight. Stacks of envelopes. Anonymous notes. The old radio humming softly in the background. Eleanor Bennett believing lonely people needed kindness before they disappeared completely. Claire swallowed carefully. "She never told me about you." Ethan gave a faint, almost humorless smile. "I do not think she expected me to become this." His hand gestured vaguely toward the expensive restaurant. Toward the city itself, perhaps. Claire looked at him more carefully now. Not the billionaire from magazine covers. Not the polished businessman television networks loved to interview. Just a tired man sitting alone with old paper in his hands. "That letter mattered to you," she said quietly. Ethan looked down at the coffee he still had not touched. "It kept me alive." Claire stopped breathing for one fragile second. The words were spoken softly, calmly, but they landed with enormous weight between them. Ethan leaned back slightly as though surprised he admitted it aloud. "I used to read it every year on the anniversary of my company's collapse." His eyes lifted toward her again. "I never found out who wrote it." Claire folded the paper carefully. Her mother had passed away 5 years earlier. Heart complications. Quiet suffering hidden behind gentle smiles and unfinished cups of tea. She suddenly wished she had asked more questions while there was still time. She believed people needed kindness most when they were ashamed. Claire whispered softly. Ethan stared at her. The sentence sounded exactly like something Eleanor would have written herself. Outside, rain drifted slowly against the glass while taxis moved through gray Manhattan streets below. Inside Bellamy's steakhouse, surrounded by polished silver and expensive silence, two strangers sat across from each other connected by the handwriting of a woman neither of them had truly understood until now. For the rest of the afternoon, Ethan Whitmore remained at the same table near the rain-covered windows, while the city moved restlessly outside. The lunch crowd slowly filled Bellamy's steakhouse with expensive coats, quiet business meetings, and polished conversations that sounded important without saying much at all. Yet Ethan barely touched the coffee growing cold beside him. Claire returned to work after their conversation, but something had changed in the air between them now. Not familiarity, not comfort, something quieter. Like two people standing carefully around an old wound neither fully understood yet. Claire moved between tables with practiced calm, carrying trays and writing orders while soft jazz drifted overhead. But every few minutes, she caught Ethan looking at the folded letter resting near his hand. Not like a businessman protecting something valuable, more like a man afraid to lose the last proof that a difficult part of his life had once mattered to someone. Around 3 o'clock, the restaurant finally quieted. Sunlight broke weakly through the clouds, turning the wet streets outside pale silver. Claire approached Ethan's table carefully. "Would you like a refill?" she asked softly. Ethan glanced down at the untouched coffee and almost smiled. "I forgot I ordered it." Claire poured fresh coffee slowly into the porcelain cup. Steam rose gently between them. "You do that often?" she asked before realizing the question sounded more personal than professional. Ethan surprised her by answering honestly. "Forget things." Claire nodded lightly. "Everything except work." He looked toward the windows for a moment. "More than I should." Claire lowered the coffee pot quietly. "My mother used to say people who work constantly are usually trying to outrun something." Ethan let out the faintest breath of amusement. "Your mother seems to have understood people better than most therapists." Claire smiled slightly at that. She noticed things. Ethan studied her carefully. The same calm eyes. The same measured way of speaking. Even the pauses between sentences reminded him strangely of Eleanor Bennett. "Did she always write letters to strangers?" he asked. Claire sat briefly across from him now that the dining room had emptied. "Not strangers exactly. People she thought needed encouragement." Ethan frowned faintly. How would she know? Claire looked down at her hands. She paid attention. Silence settled gently again. Claire traced the rim of the empty coffee pot thoughtfully before continuing. "When I was little, she used to leave notes everywhere. Inside library books, on subway seats, tucked into grocery store shelves." Ethan blinked once, genuinely surprised. Claire smiled softly at the memory. "Most of them were simple things. You are doing better than you think. Or, rest if you need to." Ethan looked down at the folded letter again. "Some people survive quietly." Suddenly the sentence felt less mysterious and more deeply human. Not poetry, not philosophy, just Eleanor Bennett seeing pain in someone and refusing to ignore it. "Did she know who I was?" Ethan asked quietly. Claire nodded once after a moment. "Probably. Then why stay anonymous?" Claire looked toward the windows where rainwater still clung to the glass in soft, uneven lines. Because kindness was never a transaction for her. Ethan fell silent after that. The sentence landed harder than Claire realized. His entire adult life had been built around transactions. Contracts. Negotiations. Value. Even gratitude usually arrived attached to money or opportunity. But Eleanor Bennett had expected nothing. Not recognition. Not reward. Not even a thank you. Claire stood slowly as another table signaled for service. "I should get back to work." Ethan nodded automatically. But before she turned away, he spoke again. "Claire." She paused. "Do you still have any of her letters?" Claire hesitated briefly. "Boxes of them." Ethan looked almost uncertain for the first time since she met him. "Would you ever let me read some?" Claire studied him carefully now. The billionaire from magazine covers seemed strangely absent today. In his place sat a tired man holding old paper like it might disappear if he loosened his grip. "Maybe," she answered softly. Ethan accepted the answer with a small nod. No pressure, no persuasion, just quiet patience. Claire returned to her section, while Ethan remained by the windows long after his coffee cooled again. Around sunset, Daniel arrived at the restaurant carrying Ethan's tablet and several folders for evening meetings. He stopped when he saw his employer still sitting there. "The board call starts in 40 minutes, Daniel reminded him carefully. Ethan looked up slowly as though returning from somewhere far away. "Cancel it." Daniel nearly dropped the folders. "Sir." "Reschedule." Daniel stared for one full second. In 8 years working together, Ethan Whitmore had never canceled a board meeting voluntarily. Not once. Ethan stood slowly and reached for his coat. His eyes drifted toward Claire one last time across the room. She was laughing softly at something an elderly customer said while refilling water glasses. The sound surprised him. Not loud, not attention-seeking, just warm, real. Ethan realized then that he had spent years surrounded by people performing versions of themselves around him. Investors performing confidence, executives performing loyalty, socialites performing charm. But Claire Bennett seemed entirely uninterested in performing anything at all, and somehow that honesty unsettled him more than power ever had. Outside, evening settled across Manhattan in shades of blue and gold. Ethan paused beside the entrance before leaving. Claire noticed him watching her and offered a polite small smile. "Good night, Mr. Whitmore." Ethan looked at her for a moment longer than necessary. Then his eyes lowered briefly toward the fountain pen resting in her apron pocket. "Good night, Claire." He stepped out into the cold city air while taxis rolled through puddles beneath glowing streetlights. But for the first time in years, Ethan Whitmore did not return directly to the office. Instead, he sat alone in the back of his car staring at the old letter in his hands while Manhattan moved around him endlessly. And somewhere between the rain, the handwriting, and the memory of a woman who believed lonely people deserved kindness too, something inside him had begun changing quietly. 3 days passed before Ethan Whitmore returned to Bellamy's Steakhouse again. In Manhattan, 3 days usually disappeared beneath meetings, deadlines, and endless movement. But for Ethan, those 72 hours felt strangely slow. He found himself noticing things he had ignored for years. The silence inside his penthouse. The untouched piano in the corner of the living room. The way his reflection looked tired in elevator mirrors after midnight meetings. Even Daniel noticed the change. Ethan no longer stayed at the office until 2 in the morning. He stopped answering emails during dinner. Twice, Daniel walked into conference rooms to find Ethan staring absently at the old folded letter instead of reviewing contracts worth millions. Something had shifted quietly beneath the billionaire's carefully controlled life, and he did not know how to stop it. Thursday evening arrived cold and clear after days of rain. The streets glowed beneath reflections of headlights, while December wind curled sharply between buildings. Bellamy's hummed softly with wealthy conversations and piano music when Ethan entered just after 7. Claire noticed him immediately, though she pretended not to. There was something dangerous about becoming too aware of someone powerful. Her mother used to warn her gently about men who carried loneliness inside expensive watches and tailored suits. Some people collect success because they do not know how to ask for comfort. Eleanor once said quietly while folding laundry years ago. Claire finally approached Ethan's table beside the windows with her usual calm expression. "Good evening, Mr. Whitmore." Ethan looked up from the menu. He clearly had not been reading. "Claire." Something softened subtly in his voice when he said her name now. "Coffee again?" she asked lightly. Ethan almost smiled. "You already know the answer." Claire poured fresh coffee into the white porcelain cup while soft jazz drifted overhead. Tonight the restaurant glowed warmer somehow. Christmas lights had appeared along the shelves near the wine display. Outside, tiny snowflakes floated slowly through Manhattan for the first time that winter. Ethan watched Claire tuck the coffee pot beneath her arm. "Are you working all weekend?" he asked before thinking too carefully about why he wanted to know. Claire glanced at him briefly. "Double shifts Saturday and Sunday." Ethan frowned slightly. "That sounds exhausting." Claire gave a small shrug. "Rent in Manhattan is exhausting." Ethan looked down quietly after that. Strange how a simple sentence from her carried more honesty than entire conversations inside executive boardrooms. Before Claire stepped away, Ethan reached slowly into his coat pocket. "I found something." He placed a folded piece of paper carefully on the table. Claire looked confused until she unfolded it. Her eyes widened slightly. It was another letter. Different handwriting, different paper, but unmistakably written by her mother. Claire looked back up at him. Ethan leaned back quietly. "I found it inside an old storage file from my first office building." Claire stared down at the page while snow drifted softly outside the windows. The letter was short. "Someone on the 4th floor cries in the stairwell every night after everyone leaves. I hope he realizes survival is not failure." Claire swallowed carefully. Ethan spoke softly now. "She wrote about me before she ever left the first letter." Claire traced the familiar loops of Eleanor's handwriting with trembling fingers. "I did not know she kept copies." Ethan nodded faintly. Apparently, she kept everything. Silence settled gently between them again. Claire folded the paper carefully and handed it back. You should keep it. Ethan looked surprised. Why? Claire offered a small, sad smile. Because she wrote it for you. For a moment, neither moved. Then a loud laugh erupted from another table nearby, as wealthy clients toasted some successful deal beneath golden light. The contrast felt strange suddenly. One world built around money. Another around handwritten kindness hidden inside old paper. Ethan broke the silence first. Would you ever show me where she used to write? Claire blinked softly. What? Your apartment. The kitchen table. Wherever she sat leaving notes for strangers. Claire hesitated immediately. Not because the request felt inappropriate. Ethan had never crossed that line with her. But because the idea felt strangely intimate in a way neither of them fully understood yet. I do not usually invite customers home, she answered carefully. Ethan gave a faint nod. Fair. Claire studied him for another second. The billionaire looked genuinely embarrassed now. Not offended. Not entitled. Just human. It unsettled her more than arrogance would have. Maybe someday, she said quietly. Ethan accepted the answer with a small smile. Real this time. Soft enough that Claire almost did not recognize him. Then his phone buzzed sharply against the table. Ethan glanced down. The screen lit up with a board member's name beside 12 unread notifications. He stared at it for several seconds before silencing the phone completely and setting it face down. Claire raised an eyebrow slightly. Important. Ethan looked at her, then toward the softly falling snow outside. Not tonight. Claire did not know why those two words stayed with her long after she walked away. Across the dining room, Ethan watched her move between tables beneath warm amber light. Calm. Quiet. Entirely herself. And for the first time in years, he realized he no longer came to Bellamy's because of the letters alone. That frightened him slightly. Because somewhere between Eleanor Bennett's handwriting and Claire's quiet presence, the carefully organized loneliness Ethan Whitmore built his entire adult life around had started coming apart one silent evening at a time. Sunday evening arrived wrapped in soft snow and quiet Manhattan light. The city felt slower somehow beneath December weather. Street musicians played holiday songs near subway entrances, while couples hurried past glowing storefronts carrying shopping bags and paper coffee cups that released steam into the cold air. Inside Bellamy's steakhouse, the warmth of candlelight and piano music softened the world into something almost peaceful. Claire Bennett stood near the service station polishing silverware while watching snow drift gently beyond the windows. Her shift had already stretched past 10 hours. Her shoulders ached beneath the black uniform, and exhaustion rested quietly behind her eyes. Still, she found herself glancing toward the entrance more often than she wanted to admit. Ethan Whitmore had become part of the restaurant now. Not loudly, not dramatically, just consistently, like someone slowly returning to a place they accidentally needed. At exactly 7:15, the front doors opened. Cold air slipped briefly through the dining room. Claire looked up automatically. Ethan entered carrying something beneath one arm wrapped carefully in brown paper. No phone in his hand tonight. No distracted expression. Just quiet focus. Claire felt an unfamiliar warmth settle gently in her chest before she quickly looked back down at the silverware. You are smiling, Nina whispered beside her with immediate suspicion. Claire blinked. What? Nina smirked softly. Nothing. Claire ignored her. Or tried to. Ethan took his usual table by the windows. Snow reflected softly against the glass behind him, while piano music drifted through the restaurant in slow, elegant notes. Claire approached with practiced calm. Good evening. Ethan looked up. Something in his expression softened instantly when he saw her. Hi, Claire. The simplicity of it unsettled her more than flirtation would have. Coffee, she asked. Ethan nodded once. Please. As Claire poured, Ethan carefully unwrapped the brown paper package resting beside him. Inside was an old wooden frame. Claire paused slightly when she saw the faded photograph beneath the glass. A younger Ethan standing beside a smiling brunette woman on a beach somewhere windy and bright. Claire recognized the photograph immediately. It was the same one she had seen in Ethan's office safe during her imagination after he described it. But now the picture looked worn around the edges. Loved. My wife. Ethan said quietly, noticing her eyes linger on the frame. Claire looked back at him gently. She looks kind. Ethan's gaze remained on the photograph for several seconds before answering. She was. Claire set the coffee pot down carefully. Was. Ethan nodded faintly. Cancer. 11 years ago. The words were calm, controlled, but grief still moved beneath them quietly like an old river that never fully disappeared. Claire sat across from him for a moment while the restaurant buzzed softly around them. I am sorry. Ethan gave a small, grateful nod. Most people do not know. Claire glanced toward the photograph again. You keep her picture with you? Ethan looked down at the frame resting near his coffee cup. Only in December. Claire waited quietly. Ethan surprised himself by continuing. She used to leave notes around the apartment. Claire blinked softly. Notes. A faint smile touched Ethan's mouth for the first time that evening. Inside books, refrigerator doors, coat pockets. His fingers traced the edge of the frame gently. Small reminders. Eat something. Sleep more. Stop pretending you are invincible. Claire's chest tightened unexpectedly. Eleanor Bennett had done the same thing. Her mother once hid tiny, encouraging messages inside Claire's school lunches during difficult weeks. For a strange second, the similarities felt almost unreal. Ethan looked toward the snow outside. After she died, the apartment became very quiet. Claire did not speak. Some silences deserved respect instead of interruption. Ethan continued softly. Then a year later my company collapsed. And somehow, your mother's letter sounded like something Emily would have written. Claire felt emotion move quietly through her chest now. Not pity. Understanding. Ethan Whitmore suddenly made sense to her in a way he had not before. The endless work. The isolation. The expensive loneliness hidden behind polished success. He was not cold because he lacked feeling. He was cold because grief had convinced him warmth eventually disappeared. Claire looked down briefly before reaching into her apron pocket. Then she pulled out a folded napkin and placed it beside his coffee cup. Ethan frowned slightly before unfolding it. In elegant cursive, Claire had written only one sentence. Grief does not leave when someone is forgotten. It leaves when someone is remembered without pain. Ethan stared at the handwriting silently. The restaurant noise faded somewhere far away again. Claire suddenly looked nervous for the first time since he met her. My mother used to say that, she explained quietly. Ethan's thumb rested lightly against the napkin. The same fountain pen. The same careful loops. The same quiet humanity hidden inside simple words. He looked up slowly. Do you always carry wisdom around in your apron pocket? Claire laughed softly despite herself. The sound felt warm enough to soften something deep inside Ethan's chest. Only for emotionally unavailable billionaires. Ethan blinked once, then unexpectedly laughed too. Real laughter. Quiet but genuine. Several nearby diners glanced over in surprise. Apparently Manhattan had never heard Ethan Whitmore laugh in public before. Claire smiled before standing again as another table needed service. But before she walked away, Ethan spoke softly behind her. Claire. She turned. Ethan folded the napkin carefully beside the old letter still resting inside his coat pocket. Thank you. Claire looked at him for one lingering second beneath the warm restaurant lights. Then she nodded gently and returned to work while snow continued falling outside Bellamy's steakhouse. And for the first time in 11 years, Ethan Whitmore no longer felt entirely alone in December. 2 nights before Christmas Eve, Claire Bennett finally invited Ethan Whitmore to her apartment. The invitation happened quietly. No dramatic moment. No careful planning. Bellamy's had closed early because of heavy snow, and most of Manhattan seemed wrapped beneath soft white silence by midnight. Claire stood near the restaurant entrance, buttoning her coat, while taxis crawled carefully through slush-covered streets. Ethan waited nearby beside his car, hands tucked into the pockets of his dark wool coat as snow drifted slowly through the city lights around them. You should not drive tonight, Claire said softly while looking toward the nearly empty streets. Ethan glanced upward at the falling snow. Probably not. Silence settled gently between them, warm somehow despite the cold. Then Claire looked down briefly before speaking again. I still have my mother's kitchen table. Ethan looked at her carefully. Yeah. Claire nodded once. If you want to see where she used to write. For a second Ethan said nothing at all. Snowflakes caught quietly in his dark hair, while distant sirens echoed somewhere far downtown. Then he answered softly. I would like that. 20 minutes later, they climbed the narrow staircase above the old laundromat on the Lower East Side. The hallway lights flickered faintly while old radiators hissed against the winter cold. Ethan followed Claire quietly, carrying a paper bag from the bakery she insisted on stopping it along the way. "You bought too much," Claire said while unlocking apartment 4B. Ethan looked down at the bag. "It is 2 muffins. For 2 people." "Exactly." Claire shook her head softly, trying unsuccessfully to hide a smile. The apartment greeted them with warmth and the faint scent of vanilla candles. Ethan stepped inside slowly, taking in the small details immediately. Stacked books beside the couch. A knitted blanket draped carefully over the armrest. Soft jazz humming quietly from an old radio near the kitchen. Nothing expensive, nothing performative. Yet the apartment felt more peaceful than his penthouse had in years. Claire removed her coat and hung it beside the door. "Sorry, it is small." Ethan looked around again. "It feels lived in." Claire blinked softly at the answer. Most wealthy people usually called places like this modest, or charming in the condescending way rich people sometimes did. But Ethan sounded sincere. Claire moved toward the kitchen. "Tea." Ethan nodded. "Please." While water heated softly on the stove, Ethan's attention drifted toward the small wooden table near the window. Round edges worn smooth with age. Tiny scratches visible beneath the lamplight. Beside it sat the familiar silver fountain pen resting atop a folded notebook. Ethan approached slowly. "This is where she wrote?" Claire looked over from the kitchen. "Almost every night." Ethan touched the back of the old wooden chair gently. Somehow the ordinary simplicity of it affected him more than he expected. Eleanor Bennett had changed the course of his life sitting right here beside this tiny table above a laundromat, while snow probably fell outside exactly like tonight. Claire returned carrying 2 mugs of tea. Steam curled softly upward between them, while the city glowed pale beyond frosted windows. Ethan sat carefully at the table. Claire sat across from him. For a few moments neither spoke. The quiet felt natural now. Ethan noticed that around Claire's silence never demanded filling. His eyes drifted toward a framed photograph resting nearby. Eleanor Bennett smiling beside a younger Claire beneath autumn trees in Central Park. "You look like her," Ethan said softly. Claire followed his gaze toward the photograph. "Everyone says that." Ethan shook his head faintly. "Not just physically." Claire looked down at her tea. "That is probably the nicest thing anyone has ever said to me." Ethan studied her carefully beneath the warm apartment light. No makeup beyond what remained after a long shift. Blonde hair falling loosely around tired eyes. Entirely unguarded in a way he realized he had almost forgotten people could be. Claire stood suddenly and walked toward the bookshelf near the couch. Then she returned carrying a worn cardboard box. "There is something I never showed anyone before." Ethan sat straighter quietly. Claire placed the box carefully onto the table and lifted the lid. Inside rested hundreds of folded notes organized with faded ribbons. Ethan stared silently. "These are all hers." Claire nodded. "Most of them." Ethan reached carefully toward one stack. Each envelope carried small handwritten labels. "Grocery store woman," "lonely taxi driver," "man on subway platform." Ethan looked up slowly. She wrote all these for strangers? Claire smiled faintly. She believed people fall apart quietly in New York because everyone is too distracted to notice. Ethan swallowed carefully. The room suddenly felt very still around him. Claire handed him one folded note at random. Ethan opened it slowly. "Whatever happened today, please survive tomorrow too." That was all it said. Simple, gentle, human. Ethan stared at the words longer than necessary, while emotion moved quietly through his chest. Claire watched him carefully now. "You know what the strange part is?" Ethan looked up. Claire smiled sadly. "Most people never knew who left the notes. But every once in a while, someone wrote one back." Ethan frowned slightly. "Back?" Claire reached deeper into the box and pulled out several folded papers written in unfamiliar handwriting. "Thank you. I needed this today. Whoever you are, you helped me stay." Ethan looked at the letters silently while snow drifted softly against the windows beside them. Then Claire spoke the words that finally broke something open inside him. "My mother used to say lonely people save each other without realizing it." Ethan lowered his eyes slowly toward the old kitchen table, toward the notes, toward the life Eleanor Bennett quietly built without money or recognition or status. And for the first time in years, Ethan Whitmore understood something success had never taught him. The most powerful people in the world were not always the loudest ones. Sometimes they were simply the ones who noticed when someone else was hurting. Christmas Eve arrived wrapped in soft white snow and golden Manhattan light. The city felt different that night. Slower, kinder somehow. Storefront windows glowed beneath strings of lights, while strangers carried wrapped gifts through the cold with flushed cheeks and tired smiles. Bellamy's steakhouse buzzed with holiday conversations and piano music drifting gently through candlelit air. But for the first time in years, Ethan Whitmore was not there. Claire noticed immediately. She tried not to. Still, every time the restaurant door opened, part of her looked up automatically before she could stop herself. By 9 o'clock, snow covered the sidewalks outside in quiet white layers. Families laughed softly around dinner tables, while couples toasted beneath crystal chandeliers. Claire moved through the dining room carrying plates and refilling wine glasses with her usual calm grace. But something inside her felt strangely unsettled. Ethan had come nearly every evening for weeks. Then suddenly, nothing. Your billionaire friend missing tonight. Nina whispered while stacking dessert menus nearby. Claire gave her a warning look. He is not my billionaire friend. Nina smirked knowingly. Right. Claire tried to ignore the warmth rising slightly into her cheeks. Around 10:30, Bellamy's finally began closing early for the holiday. Chairs lifted onto tables. Candle flames dimmed. Snow drifted quietly beyond the windows while the city softened into silence outside. Claire untied her apron slowly and slipped the silver fountain pen into her coat pocket. She suddenly felt exhausted in the deep, quiet way holidays sometimes create for people carrying old grief. Eleanor Bennett loved Christmas. Every year, she filled their tiny apartment with handwritten notes hidden everywhere. Inside cookie jars, coat pockets, between pages of books Claire had not opened yet. Little reminders that someone cared enough to leave kindness behind. The first Christmas after Eleanor died, Claire spent the entire day pretending not to cry, while subway trains rattled endlessly through Manhattan beneath gray winter skies. She still hated how empty December could feel sometimes. Claire stepped outside Bellamy's just before 11. Snowflakes drifted slowly beneath streetlights while cold wind curled around the nearly empty sidewalks. She wrapped her coat tighter and started walking downtown through the quiet city. Then she stopped suddenly. Across the street, beside a small public park glowing softly beneath Christmas lights, stood Ethan Whitmore. Alone. Claire blinked softly in surprise. Ethan looked different tonight somehow. No tailored overcoat. No expensive gloves. Just a dark sweater beneath a simple wool coat dusted with snow. In his hands, he carried a cardboard box. Ethan noticed her immediately and crossed the street carefully through the snow. You are working too much, Claire said softly before she could stop herself. Ethan smiled faintly. You said that already. Claire glanced toward the box in his hands. What is that? Ethan looked down at it for a moment. Something I need your help with. Claire followed him silently into the small park where fresh snow covered empty benches and sleeping trees. At the center stood a simple metal table beneath glowing lights. Ethan placed the box carefully on top. Then he opened it. Claire stared in confusion. Hundreds of folded handwritten notes filled the box. White envelopes. Cream-colored paper. Elegant cursive. Different handwriting. Different people. What is this? She whispered. Ethan looked almost uncertain suddenly. 3 weeks ago, Whitmore Capital launched something quietly. Claire listened carefully while snow drifted around them. Ethan continued softly. We placed empty boxes in subway stations, libraries, shelters, hospitals, all over Manhattan. Claire frowned slightly. Ethan reached into the box and unfolded one of the notes carefully. People were asked to leave anonymous messages for strangers who might need encouragement. Claire stared silently at the hundreds of folded papers while emotion slowly moved through her chest. Ethan looked toward the glowing city beyond the park. At first, I thought maybe a few people would participate. He gave a small, almost disbelieving laugh. The boxes filled overnight. Claire picked up one envelope carefully and read the message inside. You are not behind in life. You are simply still becoming who you are meant to be. Her eyes softened instantly. Ethan watched her quietly. We are calling it the Eleanor Project. Claire stopped breathing for one fragile second. Snowflakes settled silently into her blonde hair while the city lights blurred softly around them. You named it after my mother? Ethan nodded once. She spent her life helping strangers survive quietly. His voice lowered gently. I thought the world deserved more people like her. Claire looked down at the hundreds of handwritten notes filling the box. Messages from lonely students, tired nurses, grieving fathers, strangers comforting strangers without names or recognition. Just kindness passed quietly from one hurting person to another exactly the way Eleanor Bennett once did. Claire's eyes filled suddenly with tears she had not expected. Ethan noticed, but said nothing. Some emotions deserve privacy even when shared. After a long silence, Claire whispered softly, "She would have loved this." Ethan looked toward the snow-covered city around them. "She already built it." Claire turned toward him slowly. For a moment neither spoke beneath the falling snow and golden Christmas lights. Then Ethan reached carefully into his coat pocket and handed her a folded piece of paper. Claire opened it slowly. The handwriting was his. Messier than hers. Less elegant, but careful. Intentional. "Thank you for returning a part of my life I thought was gone forever." Claire read the sentence twice while emotion settled quietly between them like the snow around their feet. Then she looked up. Ethan Whitmore stood beneath the winter lights looking calmer than the Billionaire newspapers wrote about. Less lonely too. Claire folded the note carefully and slipped it into her coat pocket beside the silver fountain pen. Somewhere nearby, church bells rang softly through Manhattan midnight. Christmas had arrived, and for the first time in many years, neither of them felt entirely alone.